Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Categorically Romance podcast. My name is Bree, and I'm very excited for my chat today. I have author Michele Dunaway joining us. Michele, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Michele Dunaway. I am in St. Louis, Missouri. I've been writing and publishing basically all my life, but publishing with Harlequin since the year 2000. And I did 3 books for St. Martin's Press. I am a teacher by day and an author by night, as I like to say.
What do you teach?
I actually retired after a long career teaching English and journalism. And now I am working for the last 2 years in sort of an emergency position teaching English language learners English. So those are students who are either new to our country and English is not their first language, or they were born to parents who are, immigrants who are also English was not their first language, but their kids could be born here.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay. I teach 6th grade English in Texas, and just kind of like part of, I guess, teaching English here, we have to get the ESL cert, like English as a
Mm-hmm.
second language. So I'm wondering if it's the same thing.
In Missouri, it's called ELL, and it's an ELL, which is English Language Learner Certification. I mean, it's probably very, very similar. So, I work with. I've got a bunch right now. I have a few Afghani refugees. I have Ukrainian refugees. I will have
Wow.
some
Yeah.
Mexican refugees. There are something like 300 different countries represented in our district. And
Wow.
I have over 66 kids just at our high school. So,
Wow. Well, I have some slumber party get to know you questions. So the first thing that comes to mind, what would you say is the last song that got stuck in your head?
I like alternative music. I basically make a playlist for every book, which can be found on my Spotify. I just had to do an MRI. So basically, my go to music whenever I'm in the MRI machine is always Bastille. I tell them Bastille Radio, and it always starts with Pompeii.
Okay.
That seriously is probably my all time go to song ever since it debuted in like 2012. And, so that one is one that I am fine with it being stuck in my head or being played on repeat. The last concert I saw was Joy Wave. Destruction is actually my favorite song, which they sort of wrote as a joke. And sort of like romance writing, they put every single trope that you could throw into the song into the song. So I got to see them just recently, and that was a lot of fun.
Well, you decide you want takeout for dinner tonight. Where do you order from, and what's your order?
Okay, so I almost never do takeout, but when I do it, it's from a restaurant called Billy G's in Kirkwood, Missouri. And I get toasted ravioli and chicken spadini. And
Mm.
if you ever read any of my books, you'll notice that a lot of times, if they're set in St. Louis, there's always a toasted ravioli reference. And so that's sort of my go to food. But if you're actually going out to dinner with me, I take a lot of my friends to a place in St. Louis called Arzola's, which has seriously the best steak fajitas in town,
Okay.
hands down.
Ooh, sounds delicious. What is one of your favorite tropes to read?
I love small town romance, obviously, since I write that, office romances, fake relationships, and I'm always about the second chance romance.
Mhm.
And the latest ones I just did were basically One Night to Forever.
And tell us 2 of your current obsessions. Like, what are you loving at the moment?
Okay, so 2 things. One, I am not a tea drinker, but they hooked me on this advertising because if it's about a cat, I'll look at it. So, Kitty Town Coffee is this online coffee website. And I was like, ooh, I'll buy some of this because they support cat charities, and so do I. And I don't drink coffee, but they had tea. I don't drink tea. This tea is the best tea I've ever had. I am brewing myself cups of tea, and I'm like, look at me go, because I'm obsessed with it, because anyone who knows me goes, you don't drink tea. And I'm like, no, but I love this stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, seriously. And the other one is travel. I mean, I am obsessed with travel. I That was part of the post retirement, and one reason why I took this emergency job was to be able to afford to travel. Like, I spent a month in Europe this summer. I was in England, Ireland, and France. I was in Stockholm visiting my daughter and son-in-law who live there last March, and then I've just been all over, enough that I've almost hit the third airline status. And that's really kind of scary. And now it's sort of a
Wow.
game. And I'm like, am I going to get there? I'm like, we'll see. I have one flight segment and like 3,000 of their points to figure it out. So by December 31st.
A month in Europe sounds like a dream. Like
It
it
was
truly sounds like a dream.
it was lovely. I was there. I took it's this group called Vagabond Tours, and I did a 6 night 7 day tour as a solo travel or small group tours, and we went all over mostly the southern part of Ireland. I had a day beforehand and then 2 days afterwards, and then I flew to England and met my neighbor. Her family, her son lives in London, and we did all of sort of the Bronte stuff. We did Liverpool, we did the Moors, and we went to York, and then back to London. And then I flew on and hung out with Olivia Regal, who is another romance author, with her family in the south of France for about 2 weeks. So,
Oh
and then I
my
came
gosh.
home. It was lovely. It was lovely, and I want to go back so bad. I am just ready to get back to Europe. Although none of my flights went off as to get there or get home. Like I was canceled or I rerouted into Shannon instead of Dublin. So my first thing of getting to Ireland was getting to the wrong airport in Ireland and having to make my way by seriously a bus and 2 trains and then a cab to get to my hotel.
Oh
Because,
my gosh.
because they were like, we can get you to Shannon. And I'm like, well, that's good because the tour leaves at 8 a.m. on Monday morning and I have to be on that bus. It's a little bus, but I have to be on that bus or, it's like missing a cruise ship. I don't know how I'm going to catch up.
You sound like the heroine of like a Netflix rom-com. Like American Girl goes overseas to travel and like all these mishaps happen.
And it really, I mean, otherwise it was okay and it was pretty good. It was definitely interesting in the sense that I had not picked up my euros because you really don't need a lot of times euros because everything is cashless, even though cash is king. And so, the tour company is like, we'll just stop and people can just grab some out of the ATM. And it really didn't cost much more in fees. But I thought what was so interesting about it was that we, I mean, some poor boy was like on, and so he's like, nope, you just tap your credit card, it'll be fine. He was going to the Liam Gallagher concert. And then he was like, nope, this bus won't take cash. And I said, I'll just get the next bus. He's digging in his suitcase and he says, I am paying for your bus ticket. Get on the bus. He goes, I will. And he's like, sit with me and I will get everything straightened out for you. So I was like, oh my gosh, welcome to Ireland. Everyone was so wonderful. I mean, it was just phenomenal and fantastic.
Have you like kind of learned anything about yourself through solo traveling?
I think the only time I almost had an entire breakdown, um, you know, was the moment that I got up I was in Toulouse, France, and I was supposed to fly to Montreal and then fly home. And basically, my plane was canceled. And then um, they got me to United, which is what I had booked through, was trying to work with all their partners, and they got me into Frankfurt. Air Canada, who I was on, hadn't done my ticket right, and they basically were like, "Look, we can't get you. We can't get you on this plane," because they were trying to get me on a United flight home, 10 hours to Houston. And I just remember walking into the lounge afterwards because I'm going to be flying to Toronto. I am booking my own hotel room. This number one thing, have travel insurance because they paid for that hotel room. And I just remember walking in and I'm into the lounge because I do have a club membership. And the woman's like, you look so stressed. She goes, I cannot fix your ticket or I would put you in business class. I feel so sorry for you, but it's going to cost this much. And she turned around. And then when she turned back, my credit card was in my hand. I was like, I don't care how much it costs. This is me work. This is why I work.
Yeah.
but I was like, that was the joke of my friends were all like, and it was enough, but it was, and they're like, and I said, it is cheaper than a lawyer when they have to escort me off the plane when some kid kicks my seat for 8 hours and I turn around and kill them.
Yeah. Yes.
We're taking out we're paying for this pod simply to save everybody else.
Yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
because at that point, I mean, I had been gone for 4 weeks and I just wanted to get home and I was giving myself a full day of travel before. I mean, so I literally got home at like 9 o'clock at night and had to be at work for the first day of like teacher meetings at 8 o'clock next morning.
Oh my
And so
gosh.
I was just like stress that I've discovered what stress I can handle and what stress I can't.
Yeah.
So
But that is such a cool story, though. Like, you have that
yeah.
story to tell.
hmm Well, and it worked out in a way because they flew me through Toronto, and so I understood the Toronto airport and everything. When we went up for the Harlequin 75th anniversary
Oh,
party,
yeah.
I already understood how to navigate the airport, so I felt a lot more confident when I went back through Toronto. And like, I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks later, it wasn't bad. So it's just sometimes, you have all the things like I have global entry that makes life easier. Make sure you have your phone apps and all that makes life easier. And just you know like I said, I bought a club membership because I knew I was going to be traveling so much, and so any partner airline, if I'm on that airline, I can use that lounge. And that made all the difference because you have a place to go. So
Well, let's talk about you as a reader. Like, how did you become a romance reader?
honestly, it was a fluke. And so, I mean, I was always a voracious reader who, even as a kid, would ride my bike to the bookmobile every 2 weeks and just reading everything I could read. And so I found romance, honestly, on a trip to Florida. Back then, basically, you know, you drove everywhere in cars. The cars didn't necessarily have AC. There were no cell phones, no video games, no movies, no DVDs. So you either read or you slept. I mean, that's how you passed your time when you were, in the backseat of a car going wherever you were going.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd finished all my books, and my mom let me buy one from a rack in the gas station that we had stopped at. And it was one of those 70s. I mean, the old fashioned, bodice ripper historical covers, with the girl in the clinch and, all that. I was in 6th grade. My mom never actually, censored any of my reading. She just let me read whatever I wanted. But I had to ask her, I'm like, what does this mean? What are they doing? And she's kind of like, oh, well, maybe I should have like looked at that book, you know. But honestly, again, she's like, well, okay, and she wasn't going to start. So I read the whole book, and I just liked the idea of romance. It's a happily ever after. It's, like I said, I grew up mostly in 70s and 80s. And basically, there's a photo of me 2 years later on the beach at Gulf Shores, Alabama, reading a Harlequin Presents. So,
Oh,
and that's just, even in like high school, not necessarily high school, college, I was writing romances. And so, my friends all just thought I was crazy. And I'm like, but you know what? It's like, I call them brain candy. Like I said, I'm an English teacher. And, no matter how good Benedict Cumberbatch made Hamlet look, I don't really want him to take him to bed. So,
yeah.
you
No.
know, I want something light. I want something that I know I'm going to enjoy, which is why my pet peeve sometimes with Netflix when they're like, this is a romance. And I'm like, no, it wasn't.
No, it wasn't. Yeah.
So I honestly now on Netflix will go and read the ending on like a synopsis recap before I will look at any Netflix movie. Seriously. Because I'm like, I do not want you to disappoint me. Like
Yeah.
sitting in bars eating cake was not a romance. So
Well, okay, so you were writing in college. Were you writing before then, or was it really like once you discovered your love of romance that you started?
no, actually, I was always writing. I always say that in 1st grade, I wanted to be a writer, in 2nd grade, a teacher, and by 3rd grade, I was determined to be both. I mean, I also wanted to be a nun in 1st grade because I was at a Catholic school, but that definitely passed. Um, in 6th grade, my language arts teacher would put pictures up on the wall. They'd be random pictures. It could be people, wrapping Christmas presents or a landscape or something like that. And she would have us write stories. Pick a photo, write a story about it. Now, as a teacher myself, I understand it was basically just a time filler every so often so that she could grade papers while we were
Mhm.
all scribbling away. But I loved it. It was my favorite assignment. And, in high school, when my mom remarried, I gained a stepsister. And so I wrote love stories involving all the kids on the block, all right, where I got to marry all the really cute boys. And my stepsister wrote westerns and she killed them all. So we I mean it was just kind of fun. And we used an old manual typewriter to, bang out those stories literally is what we did. So that's kind of where it started. And then I just had notebooks full of just stories. I just kept writing and writing and writing.
So, from what I could see online, A Little Office Romance was your first published romance, and it was with Harlequin's American Romance line. So, tell us your journey. So, you've shared, how did we go from the gas station rack romance to getting published?
It's actually a little bit of a funny story, but it's a little long. So I
It's
was
okay.
standing in Washington, D.C. as a journalism teacher. I had taken a group of students on a convention. I had written a full length romance, and I was on basically the second one. You shelve the first one, which by the way ended up being book two. I did sell that book, but I sold actually the second book I wrote the first time out, even though I say that's the first book. But it was the first book I seriously went after publication on. So I was standing in Washington, D.C., and I thought, I'm going to set a book right here on this street corner, which was nearby the Woodley Park Zoo metro station. And that apartment building, not that I've ever been inside the building, but this corner, this is where she's going to have her apartment. And at that time, I didn't really know that people didn't set books in, Washington, D.C., but the idea came, so I ran with it. I'd done research and I joined RWA, then my local chapter. And, they were like, hey, there's this RWA conference in Chicago. You should go. So you should make an editor appointment. I'm like, well, okay, we'll do that. So I had no idea who to choose for my editor. And I was kind of at the very end there. A lot of the editors were already full. So I emailed two of my favorite Harlequin authors. Seriously, you're not supposed to necessarily do this either, but I didn't know. Marie Ferrarella and Sandra Martin. And they didn't know me at all, but they both answered my emails. One said, seriously, one said, you have a Harlequin American, and the other said, and the new line editor is Melissa Jaglinski. And that's who I
Wow.
made my appointment with. And I got an appointment. So you go down for your time. I've memorized my pitch, and all that goes out the window. I mean, I'm so nervous. I get down. I had my pitch on note cards. I show up for my appointment. It's this huge mass of people that are all like queuing up for the door as if you're going to open the door and be running to go like, grab Christmas gifts off a shelf, or something like this. When you see them that open the door and massive people start running inside, that's what it was. It was sort of like that. And so this girl, I'm just sort of like, I don't wear a watch and I don't have, phones didn't necessarily, have time all the time. And I didn't have it with me anyway. Um, and they're like, go, go. And so I go and I plop down and I take a seat. Poor Melissa had been getting all these pitches from authors from her previous line. And she just looks at me and she's like, what line? And I was like, Harlequin American. And I don't remember if it was Marie or Sandra. I'm like, told me that you're the new line editor. And she just sort of sits up and she says, why, yes, I am. And so I'm like, and so I start and I'm like, I start to do my pitch and finally I'm like, can I just read this? And she goes, sure. So I literally read the note cards word for word. She's like, I want to see that. And I'm like, great. At this point, the RWA coordinate comes up and she's all like, who are you? And I'm like, Michele Dunaway. And she's like, okay. And she's like, well, what time's your appointment? I'm like, 8:30. And she's like, well, it's like 8:25. And I'm like, I did not put myself in here. Somebody told me to go. So the person who was with me, she went in my spot because I guess somebody shoved me in and I took hers. Oops, sorry. But that's the funny part of this story is when Melissa calls me, because she had asked me to send her the book, and it was really funny. Because I'll be honest, I hadn't necessarily read the Harlequin American line a lot. So when Melissa had asked me, here's a secret, and now everyone will know. She's like, what have you read in the line? And I was like, oh, Judy Christianberry, the Tots for Texans, which was a book I had picked up in the goodie room. So yeah, which I went up to my room later and read. But so when she calls me to buy the book and she calls me on a Friday, she doesn't get me. So there's the 212 area code for New York sitting on my answering machine, the caller ID, no answering machine. And so Monday I get the official call and she's like, I met so many people that weekend. Can you remind me who you were? And I was like, I'm the one who was in the wrong time spot. And she goes, I remember you. And it was the start of wonderful things. Seriously. It was just, and that's just it. Cause I'm like, yeah, I'm the girl that showed up in the wrong time spot because somebody was like, go. And I'm like, okay, I'll go,
Well,
So, yeah.
so like anybody that's new to both the American Romance line and your current line special edition, do you feel like having written for both lines, were there any similarities, or as a writer, are you able to like pinpoint the differences between the two? Because I know I can hear some reader friends that like love both, or like they were so similar, but then there's like these obvious differences. What do you think, having written
I,
for both?
I think that, for Harlequin American, it was always about this idea of home and hearth that had to be really at the heart of the story, no matter what you did. So, like my Jacobson's books were all about a meddling grandfather, but they could also sometimes be a little fun and outrageous and more playboyish, um, and such. Um, the special edition reader is a little bit more small town rather than more big city. Although Terry Wilson did a whole series, about a bridal magazine set in New York City, but they're really more, special edition is really still more small town locales. But special edition really wants those real life characters and situation with relatable men and women. Like you should think that I could just sit across from them at a coffee shop and have a conversation with them, and with their friends and their family and careers. And it's a little bit more layered. The length now, though, special edition at one point was 60,000, but now it's back up to 70,000, which is what the Harlequin Americans were all the time. So um, they've brought that line, the word count back up to 70,000. So it's a much deeper read at this point, and a little, they want multiple tropes with different layers. So that's kind of the difference, a bit. So Harlequin American had evolved into like Harlequin Western, and that's pretty much what I had left the line anyway, because I don't necessarily write Western, or I didn't at that time. I actually just turned in a proposal that is sort of Western, and I just
Mhm.
did a Fortunes of Texas book, which is definitely sort of Western, the Texas. So
Well, I've always heard about how fantastic the Harlequin NASCAR series books are. I'm always on the lookout for them. And you contributed to that series. So do you remember how you came to be part of it, and like how it felt to be part of it? Because I think of like now we have like slowly we're getting these like Formula One books, and I'm like, oh, like we had the NASCAR series
mm-hmm.
before this, like this is some exciting moment in time. How was it being part of that one?
So it's going to be another one of those Kismet stories. So my older daughter and I decided that we'd go to this event in Nashville that we saw on TV called Sound and Speed. And my best friend always went to the Brickyard, but I never really understood how fanatic NASCAR fans were. That they would start standing in line like 5 hours before to see someone like Dale Earnhardt Jr. or anything like that. So we didn't get to stand in line for him because I'm like, that is just way too long. But we still had a really fun time at this event. So there was a Q&A, and people were just asking the world's dumbest questions. And I mean, like of Dale Earnhardt Jr., they're like, you know, do you wear boxers or briefs? Because he was doing, I think it was a Hanes sponsor, at that point. And he's just sort of like, I mean, seriously, I mean, you could just see this is, he's like, these are dumb questions. So I told my daughter, I'm like, go ask this question. And so she gets up to go do it, because of course they're going to, my daughter's young, and of course they're going to, put the microphone in her hand. So she asked him, seriously, besides a championship, what's the one thing you want that you don't have? And, she stumped him, and it was great. And, he came up with an answer, and it was really funny. But when we drove home from Nashville, going back to St. Louis, the book itself just sort of wrote it in my head on the way home, with my driver blurting out a wife. Like seriously.
Yeah.
So Hart Hampton goes a wife, and then just like, oh god, and so on and so forth. And he's actually at a camp for like kids that have illnesses. So it's real important to note that I had a student, Charlie Murphy, at the time, who made a big impact on me, even though he was only in my class maybe 2 days, because he had leukemia, and he was dying of leukemia. And so, and that was just when I went to his visitation, there was a Corvette under the portico.
Mhm.
And my students, who had been friends, because, told me that he'd learned to drive and that was his dream car. So that's what his parents had bought him. So
Oh.
I had written that scene in my book without
Yeah.
knowing any of this. Do you understand? Like Hart gives Charlie, because the kid in the book is named Charlie,
Yeah.
um, a Corvette And of course, mom was like, you can't just, do these things, but what's she going to do? Say no, and of course, and so seriously, I kid you not, when I tell you that my agent called me either the next day or the day after that to tell me that Harlequin had purchased that book.
Yeah.
Because it had already been written. It was already on submission with them. And she called me like almost like, I'm like, seriously, when I walked under, and I still get chills because then, in the book, my heroine's son, Charlie, gets to live. So I get to, and so, I mean, and that's, so basically, and then from there on, they asked me to do the two more Out of Line and Tailspin. And so I have to give a shout out to Clarin Graffarb, who is a good online friend. Her grandson, Caleb, actually is starting racing. Chuck did a bunch of stunt racing and, did a little bit of a NASCAR. And she's become a good online friend and everything, and really helped me with the research on some of these things. And it was just fun because we got to go and, get to go track, and we got to go on the shop floor of, Roush Racing. And that was a really good time. I mean, Carl Edwards was from, Missouri. So it was just fun to immerse myself in that world. I love doing research. And so it just made those books a joy to do.
Well, we have to talk about Love in the Valley. So I remember seeing What Happens in the Air, and I was just so in love with the cover. Um, I was like, okay, I have to read this book. I don't even really read the backs of what the books are about anymore. I'm like, the cover's got me. I'm just going to read it. And I ended up like just loving, like I immediately, as soon as like the next two came out, I just immediately got them. And it looks like What Happens in the Air. So that was your first book with Harlequin after your last American romance title.
Mm-hmm.
So did the series, and I have to say, like, my hometown is Sedalia, Missouri. And so
Oh,
like reading it, I was like, man, this feels really familiar. Like it
I,
feels really close to home. Like I think maybe like the Katy Trail or something was mentioned
mm-hmm,
or something. And I was
mm-hmm.
just like, oh my God. It was like alluded to maybe. And I was like, this feels very familiar. So did the series as a whole come to you, or did it start with What Happens in the Air?
It started with What Happens in the Air. So what ended up happening, and this is really funny because I went to Sedalia Middle School for 8th grade and then
Oh my
half of Smith Cotton
Yeah.
way back. And my brother actually, because my parents, like I said, were separated. So I lived with my dad for a little while there. And then I came back and lived with my mom. And my brother ended up, we kind of switched places. It was interesting is a good word. But I mean, my dad basically was there in Sedalia up until he finally moved back to St. Louis. Well, like he passed in, I think it was 2002. So anyhow, this book was one of those being in the right place at the right time. So I had basically, because of family things, like my mom got very ill in 2010. The line was shifting to Westerns. I took a little bit of I just took time off. My older daughter graduated high school a full year early.
Oh wow.
And so she graduated in class of 2012 instead of 2013. And, and then she graduated college a full year early. So there was just a lot going on in that time. And I was my mom's, primary caregiver, and people weren't talking in my head because I was spending every weekend having to go to, the nursing home. And so basically my friend Kim Loomis, who's thrown out as a shout out and dedication in the book, she always has a party for the Great Forest Park Balloon Race because the balloon races in the book are real. They actually really happen, not in Beaumont, but in New Haven. New Haven has a balloon race, which is a river town. And so, in Missouri. And so they have the Forest Park Balloon Race. And so she had friends who lived in Old Town St. Charles, and they were flying that day. So they just stood the balloon up, but they did, it was they weren't going to be able to get high enough to clear some of the things, that they needed to clear. So they just stood while others raced, because depending on your balloon and how high it can go and so forth, because the air was, that day, they were flying toward the airport, which is, not a good place to be flying towards. So anyhow, we kind of crewed this, and then they're like, oh, just come with us after the the thing. We've got the, the pilot dinner where we find out who won, et cetera, et cetera. So I went and I ran into one of my former coworkers. Her husband actually is a balloon pilot. And so uh, I got to meet all of Kim's friends, and they're like, oh, you should write about innkeepers who fly a hot air balloon. And I was like, okay, but I'm making you parents.
Yeah.
And that became What Happens in the Air, where I reunited, two former childhood sweethearts. And by the way, Shelby's last name, Bien, is actually an Easter egg. It's the name of my former coworker, Carolyn Bien, who I actually saw that night, whose husband has won that Forest Park balloon race.
Oh.
Then I had to figure out what came next. And when I wrote Love's Secret Ingredient, which was book 3, I actually had 25,000 words written, and I threw them out and started over. I was like, no, I need to, I'm like, this romance that kind of was going at the in Love and the All's Fair in Love and Wine. We just need to get rid of that. And oops, she didn't want to go. She's still stuck here. So, the cookie store is actually based on, I'll tell people, it's like I can make those cookies, but it's grandma's cookies in Old Town St. Charles, because that's a question, that we'll talk a little bit more. But I used parts of Old Town St. Charles, New Haven, Washington, Missouri to basically create, Beaumont, which is not a real town, but it is the name of a scout property near St. Louis. Mm-hmm. So it, and I just, again, the name is an Easter egg. It means beautiful hill in French, and the French founded part of Missouri. So that's kind of where Beaumont came from. So,
well, can you tell us what the most recent book, One Sweet Deal, what it's about?
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to do the one night to forever trope in these 3 books. The first 3 books, if you are all high school, sort of former high school sweethearts, and they're sort of second chance romances. So that's the trope overarching that held, What Happens in the Air, All's Fair in Love and Wine, and Love's Secret Ingredient together. And for One Sweet Deal, and then Room for 2 More, and then the Playboy Project, which will be out in July. Those books are held together with the one night to forever trope. So we're going to go back to Beaumont with the Clayton family, who you met Jack Clayton in All's Fair in Love and Wine, but these are his cousins, Edmund, Liam, and Michael. And so I introduced Lana and Edmund on the plane, and then I snow them in. So he's going undercover to try and win some hotels. It's sort of a, this eccentric woman they're trying to buy a hotel chain, and the Van Horn hotel chain, which, by the way, is a shout out to St. Motel's song, Van Horn. And she's, he meets her and he's like, look, you can just, I'll give you my bed, whatever. He's trying out his persona. And so what ends up happening is she ends up being in a love triangle with basically his alter ego, like his disguised person, and then him as well. And so he knows the truth, because he's the same person, just in disguise. So it's kind of a reverse on that. And so she's, and she's home, and, and she loves to travel. So it's all she really wants to do. In Room for 2 More, I pick right up after the end of that book with Liam meeting Lexi, who is actually a former pop star trying to get her life back, but oops, their night is going to have some consequences. And the Playboy Project is Michael's story, and it literally picks up right from Lexi and Liam's wedding. And, and that book will finish out the series.
So, these all sound so much fun.
They're a lot of fun. It's just, One Sweet Deal was just kind of funny because, like I said, he knows, and he knows, and he's trying to navigate this. He wants to tell her, but who he is. But if he does, will he lose this big, huge hotel, thing? So I don't want to spoil it too much. It's actually a really good story. And I loved writing these 3. So.
And you shared quite a few like behind the scenes details already. So thank you for that. But like what do you have to do for yourself? Any behind the scenes details you can share about like writing the books or just writing the series in general? Like you said that you do like a Spotify playlist for all of them. Like what are the things that kind of get you through, writing the books?
It's really interesting because I'll watch tons of rom-coms, or like Netflix is like, if there's like a YA type thing, I'm all over it a lot of times. because a lot of times I'll watch out of my genre and I'll read outside of my line a little bit, just because that way I don't get imposter syndrome. But most of my writing really does come from my head. I see things, I read about them, and then I just have to write them. And so, like, there's this whole idea of, Augusta, Missouri, which is also a river town out on the Missouri River, was purchased. A lot of everything out there, including all of these wineries, were purchased by this company that was like, we are going to create this Napa of the Midwest. And so that was the basis of what the Claytons were doing. And then I don't really know, we've had news stories where they're like, now they're selling things, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't even know what they're doing, but it was just, I'm going to take that idea, I'm going to fictionalize it, and now I'm going to um, just create my own world with it. But all that was, you'd get just the seed of the idea, and then it just takes on its total life. I don't necessarily follow it past there. So, for instance, I just finished Conveniently a Fortune, which uses marriage of convenience trope and is part of that Fortunes of Texas continuity. And for that, I got to go on the factory floor at Chocolate Company, which is a St. Louis company owned by the Abel family. And they made actually the Cupid chocolates that were found in the Hallmark movie Sweeter Than Chocolate.
Oh
So
my
they're a pretty
gosh.
big company. They own
Yeah.
Bissinger's as well. And so, as my heroine wants to take over her grandma's small chocolate business, seeing things firsthand with Christina Abel really helped me make the book more authentic. And by the way, I highly recommend their chocolate. You can find it online. And so they know that, like, there's this rose tea chocolate truffle that they did. I actually had it when they were testing it out as a bar. Now you can't get the bar, but they did it as a truffle. So I worked that in the book. So it's things like that. Like I said, those behind the scenes, the research. I love the research. For the Playboy Project, I got the idea from Highway 54. They had to move an eagle's nest to put a new Highway 54 through. And that involves all of these details of U.S. Fish and Wildlife, etc. And you have to wait until the eagles leave the nest, and then you can remove it. And when they return to the area, they'll just build a new nest somewhere else. And so I saw that, and I was like, ooh, I can use that idea as a basis of, we found an eagle's nest where we need to be building our new golf course. Now what? And then you take that as, again, that's that, little seed of an idea that we now grow into a new direction.
Mm-hmm. So, for someone that's brand new to your bibliography, and this may be tough because I know authors, you love all of your books, like they're your babies. But like, what book comes to mind as like a good place to start, like to get to know your writing and like how you love to tell stories? Like, which one would you point people to?
I mean, I would start, with either What Happens in the Air or One Sweet Deal. I mean, because What Happens in the Air is all, and then All is Fair in Love and Wine, and then Love's Secret Ingredient. Those three books are linked, but each can stand alone. You do One Sweet Deal, then you can go into Room for Two More, and then in July, like I said, the Playboy Project, but they can be read out of order too. If you like sports, I wrote two hockey romances, pretty much just because they were characters talking in my head. And so I indie published those. I indie published The Center's Bet and The Goalie Secret, which are currently live and free for those who have Kindle Unlimited. Those were 90,000 words each. So I call them Hockey with Heart because they have deeper, more layered plot lines. So, but they were just something that, I did on my own. And I knew that they weren't necessarily going, I mean, they're fabulous books. Those are actually two of my favorites because I love hockey. So,
And are you currently working on anything you can tell us about?
yeah, I just turned in a new proposal to my editor, and my fingers are crossed that they do that. And so that was based on some stuff that we discussed when I was in Toronto for the Harlequin 75th anniversary party. And so while we wait, though, I'm working on a single title, seriously, totally out of my wheelhouse, single title Southern women's fiction story about three estranged sisters who must work together to fulfill their late grandma's series of quests in order to inherit $1 million each. The trouble is they're going to have to confront their pasts in order to secure their futures.
Oh, I love me a good women's fiction, and if it's something with like a grandmother, something left behind, oh, that
Hmm.
sounds really, really
Yeah,
good.
the working title is called Pie Promises and Sweet Southern Luck.
Oh!
So they have to, the last task, and I mean, it's not a spoiler, is that they're going to have to recreate her pie. But the trouble is, there is no recipe. And it's a chocolate
Oh,
bourbon pie. And
because
so,
grandmas, they didn't write anything down.
nope, nope, exactly. So, and remember, there are three kind of estranged sisters, and two of them have been gone, and like so had never wanted to return anyway. And the one that remained behind doesn't want to be there, and has basically run Grandma's bakery into almost foreclosure. So. I'm about
Yeah.
halfway through it, and my agent's like, "How fast can you get it done?" I'm like, "I'm going, I'm going."
Um, so where are you comfortable with people following you online?
I'm everywhere. I mean, I'm on Instagram Threads and TikTok at Michele Dunaway. Facebook is Michele Dunaway Books. I put out a newsletter every week, and that's available. Like, just if you go to my website, micheledunaway.com, it will pop up. At Spotify, I'm Michele Dunaway, and you know it's me because there's a tuxedo cat that his name is Oreo. He's he was the cat in the house where I was at in France, and so that's what's in my profile picture. So,
And lastly, I want to know, like, knowing what you know now, what would you go back and tell yourself at the beginning of your writing career?
I mean, I think really not to sweat the small stuff and enjoy the ride more. Seriously, I mean, my goal was once 25 books with Harlequin, and I had to give up that dream for a while because, like I said, my family had to come first. And, I did a couple of indie things that I pulled down, but I really had to focus on family. And that became a priority. And, then I did a couple, three books. So the Calendar Heroes series, which I also indie published, were actually previously released by St. Martin's Press as ebooks. And so I ended up, putting those back out last year. But I did those three books in the middle, and then I just needed time. And if people aren't talking in my head, I just needed some time to do and make decisions that I needed to do for me. There were other priorities at my work. We were trying to put the yearbook at my school into what's called the National Scholastic Press Association's Hall of Fame. We made that in 2017. My children were in college at that point, and I ended up moving in 2019, which was fortuitous because I was actually in the suburbs with high speed internet during the pandemic, and I could get out and walk around. So I remember, and my agent, I dropped me, well, and then it was kind of mutual, and then I was agent searching, and so I got a new agent. And then suddenly there was sort of, we just kept having some of these like hits and misses. Like I had a book that went all the way up into the, that was using more of kind of some bad boys. And then the Me Too movement and Harvey Weinstein, just like boom, like right when they're like, we're going to buy this. And then suddenly, nope, no bad boys right now because men were behaving extremely badly. And in romance novels, we get to temper that and, redeem them and do other things. Whereas, no woman should ever obviously have to be like Me Too. We all have Me Too stories. And that was kind of like, so I was like, okay, so I just remember when my agent called me. So we sent them What Happens in the Air. It's actually the book that I got my new agent on. And she sent it in, and my then editor, Megan Broderick, fell in love with it. And when my agent called me and she says, I have news, can we, I need to call you. And so she's like, are you sitting down? And I'm like, okay, this is gonna be really bad. Like she's going to tell me they rejected this or something. And she says, they're buying What Happens in the Air. And I was like, okay,
Oh,
awesome, which was my 24th book for Harlequin. And she says, and they're buying two more.
oh, yeah.
Two more, just sight unseen. Like just we know you can write them, just write them. And like we didn't necessarily turn in a proposal for, I mean, but she's like, they're buying $3. And so I just remember when she told me that, I just burst into tears and I cried because there was book 25. Now, if you think about it, it's really crazy. And, I mean, the Playboy Project is book number 30. So
Yeah.
what I love to do 50, 100%. Will I get to 50? Again, there's so many factors that I've really learned that all I can do is control what I can control, which is writing the best books possible, and that I'm doing exactly what I love. I couldn't do it without all my readers. I'm so grateful to them. I know I'm a better writer now than I was then because, I'm just in a different place in my life. I'm having so much more fun now, too. I love my editors at Harlequin, my current editors. They're so fabulous. I like doing the indie books on the side. I have people talking in my head again. They vanish once I get their stories on paper. That's a real weird thing about my writing process. But everybody will come up and say, "Oh, do you remember so and so in this book?" And I'm like, "No." I mean, I'm like, I feel bad, but I'm like, no, because I seriously, it's like, I can write 1,000 words an hour. I type every single word, um, and then I do a hard copy hand edit where I add everything back in. And by the time I'm done with that, unless I'm going back, and trying to connect the books or something, I'm they're like ghosts, and they've dispersed. It's like I had
Yeah.
to tell their story and now they're out.
And now
So
they're
I don't know.
gone.
I don't
Yeah.
know what that makes me as a writer. I think other people, I don't necessarily talk to my characters, but I can definitely hear them and see them in my head. I don't necessarily see them like there are some movies where they're like real people standing over there. Nope, that does not happen. But in my head, absolutely. And, I have to get their stories on paper. And so until they stop talking, seriously, I'm just going to enjoy the ride and the joy that my writing brings to others. And, I'm really excited to have, like I said, Room for two more comes out in January. And then I've got the Conveniently a Fortune, which is going to be out in April. And then there's Room for, I'm not Room, sorry. That's January. See, my brain is fried. And then the Playboy Project, which is July. And then I'm releasing Michelle's versions. I mean, if Taylor can do it, I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Of all those former Harlequin American books are going back out. I received my rights back for those. So I'm indie publishing those. And so about one of those will come out. The Jacobsons are up next. Bachelor CEO and um, Bachelor CEO and The Doctor's Little Miracle are out now. I'm going to put the Christmas date out probably in just KU. That's going to go live December 1. And then just the Jacobsons books will go out over the next year, just as so readers can find them and discover them if they want them, since they're really not available anymore.